Thank you very much for a kind introduction. It's my great pleasure to be back at my alma mater. I did my master's here in 2020, and right now I am enrolled in the School of Communication at Simon Fraser University doing my doctoral research. And my primary research area is tech and power, mainly shaped by transnational currents, and I try to incorporate the lens of social justice in every project that I do. So today what I'm going to talk about is the Datafied School in the neoliberal era. I think it's a great segue to talking about the policies of the data-driven technologies employed in the educational settings. So my research started from COVID-19. The influence of private tech companies in the public sector is obviously nothing new, but COVID-19 indeed provided a very unprecedented opportunity for many multinational corporations and edtech businesses to scale up at a speed and scope that we've never seen before, utilizing the time of fear and uncertainty. And prior to the pandemic, the concerns of the rapidly changing public education sector by the global capitalists and edtech businesses have ignited a rich body of scholarship to examine social and psychological impacts of digital education. And now we're living in the era of AI, algorithms and big data, the potential costs of datafication and data valence, which is a far more intrusive form of surveillance using data. In relation to privacy and autonomy of students, teachers, and parents are increasingly studied in critical education studies, scholarship, audio studies, and media and communication studies. But what is often overlooked in these scholarships and discourses are the ways that educational policies shape the futures of education. So my focus is on examining educational policies with the lens of globalization, transnationalism, and what I'm trying to do is to seek a momentary pause, pull back and to question, investigate, and identify the problems rising in the field of education, all in relation to the increasing use of data-driven technologies. So first of all, what needs are being assumed by policymakers? What are the pressing concerns for students and parents, schools, and institutions? And how do educational policies reflect these concerns and issues then? So here, the reason why I have chosen these two particular geographical locations of the EU and South Korean policy texts is because, first of all, they are both rigorous advocates of increased use of ICT, educational reforms, and edtech, educational technology. And in the case of EU, of course, 2018 General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, South Korea took GDPR as a benchmark and made its own legislature amendments in early 2020. And by paying particular attention to this influence that the GDPR had on South Korean legislature amendments, examining these two sites shed light on how policy arrangements speak to each other, respond to each other at a transnational level. By doing so, I'm drawing a post-colonial critique of South Korea's own struggle as an economic powerhouse with its path dependence in policymaking in the era of hyper-connected globalization. And finally, given the scope and impacts of the COVID-19, we see an urgent need for studying the policies that came out at this particular period as an initial response to the global health crisis. So, building upon Van Dijk's public values in a connected world framework, my research is premised upon this conception that education is intrinsically worthwhile for human development. And I echo the analysis on education playing the role of economic growth engine of nation building. And I use Ben Williamson's concept of data valence school to expose critical issues of data-driven technologies deployed in public schools and their implications for basic human rights of children and students. And that leads to my research question, which is, in what ways are educational policies of the EU and South Korea in conflict with public values of education? So just briefly, my research design and method, I employed purposive intensity sampling. I look at EU Commission's Digital Education Action Plan that came out in 2020. And I also look at South Korea's education policy document released in January 2021. And also published as a broad sort of agenda-setting directive, there was this promotional video that came out that was complementary to the policy. And I will show you this this video as well in a second. Well, actually, let's watch it right now. I think that's with a limited time. So you get the idea. I wonder what you guys thought of the policy promotional video. But basically, as you can see, the video story is set in this fictitious magic school named Smart Dove, Greenergy, Raven Class, School Puff, mirroring the concepts of, international best-selling book. And they consistently use this fantastical language, and they provoke children's dreams and hopes to come true in these variety of cutting-edge technologies that are embedded in this educational infrastructure. So, yeah, there you go. So, due to the limited time, I can't go all in details in terms of findings and analysis, but the overarching, the most salient finding that I wanted to discuss is this neoliberal imperatives in education. And education is reflected as a mere means of human capital enhancement in the neoliberal era in both EU and South Korean policy texts. So there is this very market-led rationality and cultural ideology that reconfigures humans as subjects of economic and consumer activities. And education is predominantly framed in this economic terms, portrayed as something that must prioritize tangible and quantifiable capital. And as Henry Giroux pointed out, education has become reduced to intellectual labor power, whose reimagined functions and roles in neoliberal rationality are to enhance, boost, advance learners' digital skills and competences for the future labor markets. So we already have seen the promotional video, and in the policy text, what is also significant in the context of South Korea is that it takes a lot more statist approach. It's very nationalist. It makes consistent references to collectivity, united combined talent that will form a type of concerted force, which reflects elements of military language as well as the industrial development strategies deployed in South Korea during the early post-war era in the 1950s and 80s, which also reflects sort of the South Korea has this dark historical periods where it was under Japanese colonization, and Korea's economic powerhouse status right now is oftentimes coined as sound educational. Without the sound educational infrastructure, it wouldn't have made its way. So there are also key Silicon Valley entrepreneurial politics discourse in both policy documents. First of all, infrastructural establishment of high-tech classroom is the key, and building schools that are thoroughly embedded in and operated by digital technologies is also promoted. And as you have seen in the video as well, these technocentric ideology of techno-solutionism and combining smart tech and green IT discourse, promoting techno-utopianism, that's also one key finding. But what I'm trying to argue from this research is that ideologies embedded in these policies perform the following key social functions. So first of all, they provide a discursive framing of education as a neoliberal capital enhancement. So what I'm trying to propose is that it's a critical time that we must rethink what it means to educate and the meaning of education in the 21st century. Secondly, it extends post-colonial globalization and xenocentrism. And thirdly, influence the already vulnerable state of education through technocentric ideals. So these ideologies intertwine to advance a neoliberal logic which amplifies this model of Datafied School, a new model of education that conflicts with public values, autonomy of human citizens. So concluding thoughts, futures of education and mandatory policies. I propose that we need a critical theory of how digital technologies are shaping and transforming education across the world. And I just wanted to end with this quote by George Peabody. Education is a debt due from present to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny Livingstone from this institution. I have a question for Ranjana and Saemi. So I'm thinking about, I think you're both, the others might want to comment too, but I'm thinking about the implications for policy and specifically the difference between the public domain or public organisations and private. So I wanted to ask Ranjana if you could say a little more about whether parents talk differently about algorithms in relation to the public domain or public sector by comparison with private sector, and if there is some consequence of that for how they should be regulated. And I think there must be something there in that Saemi's focus on schools and the kind of sense that there is something wrong in the relation between ed-tech values and public values about education. So when I look at policy regulating big tech or algorithms, it doesn't distinguish if this is public sector or private sector. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk through whether it should be.
Yeah, Sonia.
Yeah, I could address that question. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, and that was exactly the reason why my research question had to do with whether these policies are in conflict with the public values, because obviously a lot of the policies that are drawn right now, they don't address any of the public domains or public values anymore. And especially with South Korean context, a lot of the initiatives that South Korean educational services, what they do is that they take a national approach, very statist approach to push sort of nation building instead of going back to the fundamental meaning or fundamental approach to education. And that is why there's such a lack of scholarship that addresses that need to really think about where are we going, like what is the trajectory, and that's where I wanted to intervene to kind of address that. So I wonder if that answers the question.
Okay, we can move on.